promises to revolutionize the way we communicate, featuring applications like high-precision clock synchronization, anonymous quantum voting, blind quantum computing, and, ultimately, the quantum internet. However, having already reached the market, the most mature application of quantum communications is certainly quantum cryptography. The security of current cryptographic systems is often based on the assumption that potential eavesdroppers have limited computational capabilities, such as not possessing a sufficiently powerful quantum computer. While this could be true today, it might not be true tomorrow. Moreover, eavesdroppers could be already harvesting data while waiting to reach the computational power to decrypt it. This makes the data we exchange today vulnerable to retroactive attacks. Quantum cryptography provides a solution that safeguards our data against any kind of quantum attack with everlasting security. The distinguishing feature that makes quantum cryptography safe is the fact that it is impossible to extract information from a quantum mechanical system without disturbing its state. This allows two or more distant users to exchange a secret message by encoding it in the states of quantum systems and transmitting the systems between each other. Any tampering with the quantum transmission by an eavesdropper would necessarily change the state of the systems and thus be detected. This establishes one of the main differences between classical and quantum cryptography. In the latter, it is physically impossible to build a quantum cloning machine, that is, a machine able to clone the state of a quantum system in two perfect copies. What is quantum communications in concrete terms? Every quantum communication technology requires a quantum network to be implemented. This is a network where quantum information, encoded in the state of a quantum system, can be transmitted across network nodes, where it can be stored and processed. This architecture enables the execution of tasks unachievable with classical means, such as quantum key distribution, quantum secure authentication, and quantum random number generation. Quantum Communications for All is a European innovative training network, empowering 15 doctoral researchers across 6 European countries to address the key challenges of quantum communications technologies. Specifically, QCALL focuses on developing the first generation of metropolitan area quantum networks, on bridging two network users at any distance by integrating satellite links with ground repeater stations, and on devising new quantum cryptographic protocols and their supporting devices. If you want to learn more about QCALL's contributions to quantum communications technologies, click on the links below to the next video. The future of communication security will probably make use of quantum physics. The main interest for the emergent technologies of quantum communications is due to their resilience, at least in theory, to a range of quantum attacks that hackers could perform on today's security systems. Such a security advantage relies on the fact that quantum states cannot be cloned, contrary to the traditional carriers of information, such as the bits in our computer. The theoretical principles are quite clear to experts, but now it's time to actually make this technology work. With this goal in mind, the researchers of QCALL, thanks to the coordination of a group of universities and companies across Europe, set out to solve some of the implementation challenges that quantum communications faces today. The basic element of our communication will be light quanta, also known as photons. Light is already used in optical fibers for internet connections, and it has the potential to carry quantum information. Now that we chose our information medium, we need to find a communication protocol that works. In short, you can think of a protocol as a set of rules that define how the communication will be carried out in order to prevent hackers from stealing information. The most important thing for a communication protocol is, well, that it's actually secure and reliable. Proving that a protocol is secure involves lots of math and knowledge of the devices that will be used for the communication. Davide at the University of Geneva and Shovik at the Sorbonne University in Paris focused exactly on this task for different protocols. Davide worked on protocols with few photons sent along the communication link one by one or in packets, while Shovik explored protocols with continuous streams of light. Both of these approaches are promising and have their own strengths and weaknesses. There are also some hybrid approaches, some of which were explored by Nilesh at Paritech. Quantum communication protocols can also involve multiple network users, not just pairs. Indeed, thanks to the quantum entanglement of the distributed photons, each user obtains the same outcome when measuring their photon. These outcomes can then form a shared encryption key. Federico at the University of Düsseldorf worked on the subject, showing some ways in which more than two network users can safely share encrypted messages among themselves. Even after a protocol has been proved to be secure in theory, the imperfections of the devices implementing it can reduce its performance. For instance, the light sources that generate the photons, or the repeaters that help joining links to extend the communication distance, or the light detectors used as receivers all have some specific properties that must be taken into account by the security proof. Robert at the University of Vigo was able to show how a popular protocol was quite slower than expected once you consider all the imperfections in an actual implementation. Guillermo at the University of Leeds and Margarida at the University of Vigo also considered various kinds of imperfections and limitations of the devices, and were able to devise protocols that are optimized for the task. Yumang at the University of Leeds worked instead on optimizing the resources required by communication protocols that make use of many channels at the same time. These were just few examples of the topics our team worked on. Jump to our next video to see the experimental implementation of the technology involved, or to our first video to have a brief introduction on quantum communications and cryptography. Quantum communications is an emerging technology that will revolutionize the security of communication. Thanks to the laws of quantum mechanics, attempts at intercepting private transmissions can be discovered and prevented. And we won't need to fear the power of future quantum computers, which pose a serious threat to the encryption protocols commonly used nowadays. The theoretical aspects of quantum communications have been laid out, and many communication protocols have been formally proven to be secure. However, to implement quantum communications, we need to create quantum states of light, manipulate them, and transmit them efficiently. Is our technology ready for all this? The answer is not quite yet, but we're almost there. The goal of QCALL, thanks to the coordination of universities and companies across Europe, is to help solving many of the challenges, leading us to a full implementation of quantum communication protocols. At the core of the protocols proposed so far, we find the photon, which can transport quantum information at the highest speed possible. It is no coincidence that today the fastest internet connections are through photons in optical fibers. However, they still exploit a limited range of properties that characterize photons. This is why all members of our experimental research team work with instruments such as lasers, optical detectors, special crystals, and of course, optical fibers. Mirko worked at Toshiba's labs in Cambridge on a setup capable of creating secure digital keys exactly by using a packet of photons transmitted from the two users to a central processing relay. The devices we employ, however, are not perfect and present some vulnerabilities that might be exploited by hackers. Gaëtan at the Quantique in Geneva worked on this problem. He identified the strategies hackers could use and studied possible countermeasures, such as perfecting the optical detectors needed to measure states of light. Even optical fiber connections, the backbone of nowadays internet, have some imperfections, which lead to loss of signal when extended to hundreds of kilometers. To reduce this effect, special kinds of repeaters compatible with quantum states can be used. This is what Antonio, at the University of Geneva, focused on by using special crystals that could be placed between shorter elementary links of a future quantum network. A complementary strategy capable of bringing connections to continental distances is to beam our quantum information packets directly into space and use repeaters in satellites. Carlo, at the University of Düsseldorf, studied hybrid ground satellite protocols for this reason. However, sending a beam into space, keeping it aligned and correcting imperfections due to the atmosphere is no easy task, and Mujtaba at the University of Padua worked on new techniques to achieve this. Once these parts will be put together in a quantum network, we will mostly use them to share secret encryption keys among groups of network users. To achieve maximum secrecy, each user must be able to generate truly random strings of digits. It happens to be that certain quantum phenomena are regarded as the only sources of true randomness. However, they are not easily harnessed to be used in a protocol. With this purpose, Hamid at the University of Padua worked on an experimental quantum random number generator that exploits laser light. All the experiments we talked about are still quite bulky and take a lot of space in our labs. However, Innocenzo, at Toshiba's labs in Cambridge, worked on scaling down some of the elements we need for our protocols in order to fit them in integrated chips. This will make the final implementations much more practical, opening the possibility to bring the quantum internet to small devices like a smartphone. These are just some examples of the topics our team worked on. Check out our other videos to know more about different types of quantum communication protocols or to have a quick introduction on how quantum cryptography works. Quantum communications promises to revolutionize the way we communicate, featuring applications like high-precision clock synchronization, anonymous quantum voting, blind quantum computing, and, ultimately, the quantum internet. However, having already reached the market, the most mature application of quantum communications is certainly quantum cryptography. The security of current cryptographic systems is often based on the assumption that potential eavesdroppers have limited computational capabilities, such as not possessing a sufficiently powerful quantum computer. While this could be true today, it might not be true tomorrow. Moreover, eavesdroppers could be already harvesting data while waiting to reach the computational power to decrypt it. This makes the data we exchange today vulnerable to retroactive attacks. Quantum cryptography provides a solution that safeguards our data against any kind of quantum attack with everlasting security. The distinguishing feature that makes quantum cryptography safe is the fact that it is impossible to extract information from a quantum mechanical system without disturbing its state. This allows two or more distant users to exchange a secret message by encoding it in the states of quantum systems and transmitting the systems between each other. Any tampering with the quantum transmission by an eavesdropper would necessarily change the state of the systems and thus be detected. This establishes one of the main differences between classical and quantum cryptography. In the latter, it is physically impossible to build a quantum cloning machine, that is, a machine able to clone the state of a quantum system in two perfect copies. What is quantum communications in concrete terms? Every quantum communication technology requires a quantum network to be implemented. This is a network where quantum information, encoded in the state of a quantum system, can be transmitted across network nodes, where it can be stored and processed. This architecture enables the execution of tasks unachievable with classical means, such as quantum key distribution, quantum secure authentication, and quantum random number generation. Quantum Communications for All is a European innovative training network, empowering 15 doctoral researchers across 6 European countries to address the key challenges of quantum communications technologies. Specifically, QCALL focuses on developing the first generation of metropolitan area quantum networks, on bridging two network users at any distance by integrating satellite links with ground repeater stations, and on devising new quantum cryptographic protocols and their supporting devices. If you want to learn more about QCALL's contributions to quantum communications technologies, click on the links below to the next video.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay, perfect. Well, it's already 5, so good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, depending on your time zone. My name is Marcos Curti. I'm a professor at the University of Vigo in Spain, and I'm part of the project QCALL. And I'm going to be the chair of this public talk. So as we have seen already in some of the videos, QCALL is a Marie Curie training network on quantum communication that has been funded by the European Union. It has been running over the past 4 years, and it has trained 15 early stage researchers. So it includes 9 European partners, including both academic institutions and industry, and has been supported by also many international institutions. Today is the final event of the project. So let me quickly go through the agenda. We will start with a public talk given by Professor Mohsen Razavi from the University of Leeds. Then, of course, we will have time for questions. And for this, you can either write your questions directly in the public chat, or if you prefer to stay anonymous, you can also send me a message. I appear in the list of participants just as M. Curti. After the questions, we'll go to the breakout rooms, and there will be 5 breakout rooms. So the first one will be on QKD security and novel protocols. The second one will be on satellite and free space QKD. The third one will be about long distance QKD. The fourth one, beyond QKD applications. And the fifth one about QKD industry. So finally, and before we start with the public talk, let me briefly introduce the speaker, Professor Mohsen Razavi. So he studied electrical engineering at Sharif University of Technology in Iran. And then he made a PhD in quantum communication in MIT in US in 2006. After that, he was a postdoc researcher at the Institute for Quantum Computing at the University of Waterloo in Canada. And then since 2009, he just moved to the University of Leeds. During all these years, he has been working on several aspects of quantum communications, and he has made many relevant contributions to the field. So he's also the coordinator of the project QCALL. So please, Professor Ratzavi, if you are ready, you can start.
Well, thanks, Marcos, for your kind introduction. Let me first share my screen. Okay. Well, thanks very much, everyone, for joining. It's a great pleasure to be the speaker for this final event of our project QCALL. I'm also excited that this event is going to be an outreach event for public interest. So I hope that I can manage to present this work in an accessible way, hopefully to all. There is a third reason I'm excited about, and that reason is that after over a year, I'm presenting this work to you from my office, and I have a message on my board, which I left on the last day of working on 18th of March 2020, saying come back healthy. So I hope that everyone who's attending has managed throughout the difficult past year and is healthy and well at the moment. Okay, so I'm going to talk about some of the some aspects of quantum technologies. Quantum technologies covers a wide range of applications, and I'm going to focus on only one of them, and perhaps even within that one, only a particular application of that. And that would relate to communications networks. So if you want to understand what would happen to our communications network in just 2 slides, I'm going to present you the key changes that you're going to see perhaps in the next few years or decades. So all of you have encountered situations when you want to check your emails, your social networks, maybe you want to check out your GP webpage or do online shopping. And anytime that you're going to do that, then you might notice that the starting letters on your web address is these few letters, HTTP, and then an S. And this S is what I'm particularly interested in because this stands for secure. And the key changes that we are going to see is perhaps to change this S, and if you are lucky, to something like QS. Q is standing for quantum secure. And because we like the word Q, the letter Q, you might see an abundance of Qs here and there. That some of them may be overused. But interestingly, behind this seemingly small change on the surface, there is an exciting and interesting story, which is the one I'm going to talk about. So my story is in 3 parts, and I try to basically cover the basics so that we all have the common background to better understand this new technology. So I start with some basic understandings of cryptography, which helps us understand why HTTPS is secure, or as we think is secure. Then I move to some of these new quantum communications technology, the threats that they pose to the security of our communication networks, and also the solutions that they offer. And then I finish with some of the key achievements in this new field, as well as challenges that we face in deploying such a technology in wide scale. So let me start with my cryptography 101. So cryptography is the science behind secure communication of data. It's a mathematical science. And one of the key applications that cryptography has is to send confidential messages. Suppose you have Alice and Bob, 2 people in love, and they want to send secret messages to each other in such a way that if there is a jealous party, a jealous eavesdropper, checking the public channel that they are transmitting their data over, their data, that the message it remains secret. So eavesdropper cannot identify what the message is. And the key idea, and this is a common feature in all these encryption techniques that you might see, is the idea of randomization. The key to secrecy is randomization. What Alice has to do in this scenario is to use a randomizer such that the message that would go over the public channel looks utterly random to any potential eavesdropper. So for instance, in the digital world, the message of Alice effectively will be transmitted as bits, zeros and ones. And one possible option that Alice has for randomizing the message is, for instance, for each bit, she can toss a coin. If it comes head, then she just sends the message as is. And if it comes tail, then she just flips the bit before sending. So for eavesdroppers looking at the bits that are being transmitted on the public channel, she has no clue whether the bit that she observes, is it the original bit or the flipped version of it. It's actually too random that even Bob at the receiving end cannot tell what the message was. Well, that would be the case unless we somehow provide Bob with this flip, no flip information or sequence that Alice is using for encrypting her message. So this flip, no flip sequence in the jargon of cryptography is called a key. And in this case, it's a secret key because we don't want anyone but Alice and Bob know about this sequence of bits, effectively flip or no flip sequence that we've used for randomizing our bits. So in this case, the problem would reduce to the problem of key distribution. We need a mechanism by which Alice and Bob can share a secret key in advance, so that whenever they need to send a secret message to each other, they can use that for randomizing their messages. And this is a generic problem in the so-called symmetric key cryptography. Symmetric key is this mindset, which is a very old one in cryptography, that says that if you want to send a message from Alice to Bob in a safe way, imagine you have a safe, and that safe has a key. Alice has one copy of that key, and Bob has another copy of that key. And Alice and Bob are the only ones who have copies of the key to the safe. So in that case, what Alice can do, can just open the safe, put her letter or message into the safe, lock the safe, send the safe through a public channel to Bob. Bob is the only one with the key, with the unlocking key. So he opens the safe and retrieves the message. Any cryptography scheme that relies on this symmetric key, where the locking key is the same as the unlocking key, has this challenge that how to begin with, Alice and Bob can exchange that secret key. And you might have seen in like espionage movies that like the spy takes a small book, and then goes to page X and starts reading a couple of letters and uses that to send a secret message to his or her agency. So that's obviously the solution, that if Alice and Bob could come together, they exchange a long, long key, and then they could have used that for a period of time until they run out of key. Unfortunately, that solution is not useful when we are thinking of what Alice and Bob's are our current internet, are effectively your mobile device, your computer, your desktops, routers in the backbone network. These are machines which represent Alice and Bob, and they cannot come easily together. So we need to come up with this mechanism, key distribution mechanism, to enable symmetric key encryption and cryptography. So the solution that was offered, this is one of the most brilliant ideas of the 20th century, perhaps, which enabled internet the way we are using it today, was an idea which I think is what an outside-the-box idea, and I have a couple of these ideas throughout the talk. I will be touching upon them. This idea was that basically, for thousands of years, perhaps, since cryptography started, people were thinking that the only way to encrypt a message is to have the same locking and unlocking key. But who said that that's the only way to encrypt a message? Why not we think of a safe in which for locking the safe, you can pick a particular key, but for unlocking the safe, you need a different type of key. In that case, you can just share the locking key, the public key, with everyone. So that would make it public. That's why we call it public key cryptography. But only the recipient, only the legitimate recipient, has the unlocking key to find out what the message was. So this idea was implemented in 1977. This was proposed by these three gentlemen, and that's why it's called RSA protocol. A few years before that, actually, this similar protocol has been designed in GCHQ, but it was a secret at the time. But within a few years, we got this proposal, which was made public. And the idea that they had was using factoring in such a way that we can make public and private key from. So the thing about factoring is, if I give you two prime numbers P and Q, and I ask you what is P times Q, that's an easy problem. You can just write them down, no matter how large P and Q are, and calculate N. However, it turns out that if I give you N, and N is a large number, it's not at all obvious how to calculate P and Q in a reasonable time. In fact, it turned out that for best known classical algorithms that we have, that we can run our current supercomputers, let's say, for instance, it could take billions of years to factorize a 1,000-digit long number. So the protocol that they proposed was based on this idea. Let's give N, or thing that can be derived from N, as the public part of the key, but keep P and Q as the private part of the key. So everyone can encrypt using N and some other parameters, but in order to decrypt the message, you need to know what P and Q are. So this was a brilliant idea. This is how actually it's whenever you run a web page with a start with HTTPS, you're effectively using a similar protocol. But if you're a bit suspicious of the assumptions made in the security of the protocol, you may ask, well, what if we find a more efficient solution to factoring? The solution that I said is the best known classical algorithm. What if we find a better solution? And in fact, it didn't take even 20 years to come up with that solution for a theoretician like Peter Shaw, back then in AT&T Labs, and now at MIT. So he found an algorithm in 1994, which turned out, if you could implement it, you can factorize a 1,000-digit long number within a matter of days or hours. So that was obviously a blow to the whole security of our classical networks, and we needed a solution. The catch to the solution that Peter Shaw proposed was that in order to run Shor's algorithm, you needed to have a new computational device, which we call a quantum computer. So a quantum computer is fundamentally different in terms of how computation will be carried out. It probably takes another hour to explain how it works. But from what matters to the security of our communications networks, if I want to summarize what has happened, is that we are using, so protocols like HTTPS rely on a combination of symmetric and public key crypto systems. And particularly the public key crypto system that they are using is vulnerable to the threats that will emerge from a quantum computer. So a question that you may ask is, why on earth we are still using this system, this protocol? If they are so unsafe, then why are we still using them? And an answer that you may hear that is, well, we don't yet have that strong a quantum computer that can break RSA with like thousands of digits that we use for that number N. And you may have heard in the news that, well, there are some progress with quantum computing, like we have IBM and Google, the giant tech companies, who have made some small quantum computers which can do certain interesting things, but perhaps they're too small to do factoring the way that RSA will be cracked. So a question that we need to ask ourselves is, does it really matter that we don't yet have a quantum computer? If you ask Google, for instance, they probably tell you, and it was in the news, that they will have a quantum computer with millions of qubits, large enough to break RSA, before the end of the decade. So if you think that this is too optimistic, or this is just a marketing strategy, well, if not 10 years, how about 20? How about 50? Isn't it likely that we do have in the end a quantum computer? Maybe not, if not 10 years, 20, 50, 100 years from now. And if this is the case, and if you are a smart hacker, what you can do is that you can start storing all the interesting information that are currently encrypted with RSA. And once you got a quantum computer, you can just go back, crack all those messages, and find out all those secrets. Well, I think that not every single message that you send on WhatsApp is really that important to be kept secure for secret for 100 years. But there are certainly a number of applications and a growing number of applications which require that long-term security. And this is not just limited to the usual suspects, military or government secrets. It's becoming more and more common that for the reasons related to our privacy, we need to keep this information secure. So I'll give you an example. Since the COVID started, our GP has started a system, an online system in which you can fill out a form, attach a couple of pictures, and then send it to GP so that they can tell you what to do in case you are unwell. So imagine some of these pictures that you have transmitted today, a few years down the road, can be cracked by some hackers. And that issue of privacy of our medical record is something that we probably do care about them throughout our life. And we're living nowadays something on the order of 100 years. So this is a real issue, a serious issue that we need a solution for. Long-term security for certain applications requires a solution that our current infrastructure and algorithms that we use is not able to provide. So this is a problem known for quite some time right now. So in the modern cryptography community, one of the key solutions that they are pursuing, and that's a very, again, elegant and interesting solution, is the so-called post-quantum cryptography. So post-quantum cryptography is not a quantum-based solution. It's basically, it's going to replace the factoring problem with a more difficult problem that, at least for now, we don't have an efficient solution for them, even on a quantum computer. And things are making progress. The standards are coming up in a couple of years, and then probably it would take another decade or two to implement and update all the softwares that we have in our communication system. This is certainly something necessary to do in the meantime, but still the key question that I raised would remain. If you do want to provide long-term security, and remember, for the RSA, it took less than 20 years to find an algorithm which could, in principle, crack that. So what guarantee one can give you that within 20 years from now, we don't have another innovation that enables cracking some of these post-quantum cryptography algorithms? So what I want to raise as a question and then provide a solution to is can we solve this problem, this need for long-term security once and for all, so that we don't need to come back whenever our computational technologies or algorithms or hardwares have improved? And the answer is luckily yes. And again, this is perhaps the second example of thinking outside the box, is basically for the key distribution protocol, the problem that I mentioned. Instead of relying on computational complexity, one may think that how about relying on things which are less time varying. So for instance, if we have an understanding of the laws of physics, and that has tested the test of time, has passed the test of time for long enough time to rely on and think of it as a reasonable way of modeling the reality, why not we rely on those laws of physics? And in particular, the laws of physics that matters for our communication system is something that we refer to as quantum mechanics. So what I'm going to talk about next is how to use quantum mechanical principles in order to come up with a key distribution solution that solves the problem that doesn't rely on computational complexity. I call this new protocol a quantum key distribution protocol, and the term QKD is the way I would refer to from this point on. So that brings me to the second part of my talk, which is about basically understanding the basics of quantum mechanics and quantum key distribution. So I start, as I said, some of you might have heard about quantum mechanics before. Some of you might have been dazzled by some of the assumption and postulate that it offers, that it suggests, it assumes. I'm not going to have a philosophical discussion of why this is the case. Instead, I'm going to use an approach that most physicists or people who work in natural sciences typically do. So for us, typically the problem that we want to solve is we make some observation via some experiment, then we are trying to find a mathematical model that captures the essence of those experiments and predicts the outcome for us. And if you're lucky and those models are generic enough, then they can be used to predict similar experiments in the future. So my approach to understanding quantum mechanics and explaining the postulates of quantum mechanics in the next 15 minutes that I have is to basically introduce some thought experiments, some Gedanken experiments, and then from each experiment learn something and revise my model and see what I get from it. So let me start with the first experiment. So thought experiment 1. So all of you have seen laser pointers, so a laser source. So this is my virtual laser source, for instance. So suppose I've got a laser source, and I'm shining this laser through a partial mirror, a 50-50 mirror. So a 50-50 mirror, a perfect mirror is the one that fully reflects the light. A 50-50 mirror lets 50% of the light to go through, and it would reflect the other 50. And then I would set some ideal energy detector to tell me how much energy I'm observing in the receiving signals. So this is also called a beam splitter because it apparently has split my beam, to two beams. So I would refer to it as a beam splitter as well, as a 50-50 beam splitter. So what do we expect to see on this ideal energy meters? In principle, you might say, okay, you have some energy coming in. I would expect half of it to be observed on this detector and the other half on this detector. And if you do this experiment with typical laser sources, you won't be disappointed. That's more or less what you would see. Now, let me just revise this experiment a little bit. So I introduce an attenuator before hitting this beam splitter. This attenuator could be simply multiple beam splitters. Each of them basically throw away half of your light. So I repeat the same question. What would you expect to see on our energy measurement devices? So our initial instinct may suggest that, well, it doesn't matter. So, okay, you've got lower amount of energy, and I would still expect that half of it should be here and half of it should be observed here. So and that doesn't matter how much attenuation I have used. We do the experiment, and interestingly, this experiment is doable with the current technology that we have because of quantum technologies. And we make some surprising observations. Surprising if you haven't heard this story before, of course. So first of all, I start seeing different amounts of energy on my two detectors. I sometimes detect more energy here than here, and sometimes the other way. But no matter how much energy I receive, the energy difference between the two detectors turned out to be coming in increments, in chunks, in packets of energy. They are always multiple of a fixed amount of energy. So if you are a physicist and you observe this experiment, and then you have to think about, okay, so what's going on? How can I come up with a mathematical model that captures the essence of this experiment, these observations? And this problem, or similar one to this, not exactly this one, but it's something that Planck in around 1900 came up with. And the solution that he found for it was quite amazing. So again, perhaps my third example of a thinking outside the box. So for many years, people, when we were thinking of energy, the assumption was the energy could take any real values. Planck made a very, very revolutionary assumption, saying that, why should it be the case? Why not energy is coming in H, which is on the order of 10 to the minus 34 joules second, and speculated that the light that is coming out of laser comes in packets of energy, which we refer to as photons, or quanta of light. And each photon is a very small in energy, so it's h times the frequency of the laser, which is on the order of hundreds of terahertz. So we're talking about 10 to the minus 20 joules per photon in the optical region. So he made this assumption about photons instead of the continuous amount of energy we could then justify why the energy that we get on the two detectors could be different. So now let's take one of these photons. So experiment one, I need to think of light as photons. So now let's take one of these photons, and suppose I have a source that exactly generates a single photon. Again, this is something that we can do today, thanks to the quantum technology. My experiment two. So I have a single photon, and this single photon is going through that beam splitter, 50-50 beam splitter. Then what do we expect to happen? What do we observe in each of our energy detectors? So, okay, this photon is that lowest amount of energy that a packet of energy could have. So in principle, it cannot break and have a photon go here and have a photon go there. So what could happen instead, that this photon should choose a path. It should either go this way or that way. And if we do the experiment, we realize that, yes, it seems that sometimes it goes this way, sometimes it goes that way, sometimes you observe the energy corresponding to a single photon here, sometimes you observe that energy on this side. And if you run the experiment many times, this seems to be 50-50, which matches the 50-50 beam splitter that we use. So again, if you're a physicist and you want to model this phenomenon, you observe a probabilistic situation. It's as if there is a randomness to it. So once you make that assumption that energy is discrete, it seems that randomness or random behavior comes as part of the package. It's part of inherent to the quantum mechanical model of our system. And it's interesting because if you remember, randomness was the key to cryptography, was the key to keep things secret. It's a nice coincidence that we have a quantum mechanics system which is inherently random, and possibly we can use it for our cryptography purposes. So let's see if we can do that. So this is experiment two. A single photon behaves in a random way. Nice. So let's move on experiment three, and I make a bit of changes to my setting. And the changes that I'm making is instead of directly detecting after this first beam splitter, I use two mirrors to redirect these two beams and combine them again at the second beam splitter, and then do this energy detection. And the question is, what do we expect to happen now? So if I follow the model that I just introduced in terms of random behavior of a single photon, you might argue that, okay, 50-50, this single photon would either pick this route or this route, no matter which route it takes. Once it gets to the second beam splitter, is effectively like experiment two. So it either goes up or down, again 50-50. So you may think that either of these two detectors could click, and this would happen 50-50. You do the experiment, and surprise, surprise, you only see one detector clicking all the time. The other detector never clicks. And this is a weird situation, right? So it doesn't match our previous modeling, so we have to revise as a physicist our model. And one way to think about why is it happening is it has some similarity to the Young's double slit experiment, which I'm sure you've all seen. And there seems to be some sort of constructive-destructive interference. So for instance, if these two beams are being combined, so the beam that comes from the upper branch versus the beam that is coming from the lower branch, they are being combined at this second beam splitter. And it seems that in one of these output ports, we have destructive interference, so we see nothing. Whereas in the other one, we see fully constructive interference, and we always see the photon over there. So again, if you want to capture this in your model, I might just need to remind you of what was behind Young's double slit experiment. And the key idea was that once you had the incoming wave, you had two slits, each of them starting to create a second wave. And for each point on the optical screen, what we were seeing was the superimposed version of the two beams. We were basically just seeing the amplitudes of this beam added to the amplitudes of the other beam. And this idea of superposition is basically what we need to recreate that constructive-destructive interference that justifies this experiment. So in principle, so instead of just saying that, okay, this photon would either go up or down with probability 1/2, I may need to keep both options live in a superposition state. So if this notation represents a single photon in the upper branch and this represents a photon in the lower branch, I basically need some amplitudes to add them together to represent that the photon could be either of these two places. And if I keep it in this way, if I keep an amplitude and a probability amplitude, then because the amplitude can be added or subtracted from each other, it allows me to regenerate the result of this experiment correctly with this new model. I'm not going to go through the details of this because it takes time, but one take-home message from our thought experiment 3 is that the type of constructive destructive interference that we've seen with classical waves, it also happened at the single photon level. And that's a very important thing for the security of quantum system, as you will see later. So let me finish my setup experiment with my thought experiment 4. Now I'll do a slight change to experiment 3. And before combining my beams again at the second beam splitter, I just observe with some mechanisms, I just observe where the photon is. So suppose I look and I find the photon on the upper branch. Then from this point on, the experiment is exactly the same as experiment 2. I've got one exact photon and no photon here. This photon is going through a beam splitter. So I know what I would expect to happen. Either of these detector could click. If I run the experiment many times, half of the time this one would click, the other half the other one. So the experiment result, my experiment outcome of experiment 3 would suddenly change to something else, why I have these pairs of eyes in the middle of my channel. And this is a very important thing. So basically, what happened? So you can think of that superposition state that I showed you earlier as sort of the uncertainty in my knowledge about where the photon is. Once I do the experiment, that uncertainty is gone. I can tell exactly what my photon is. So the state of my system suddenly collapses to something else. And this happens in a way that it's not necessarily reversible. If I had U plus L or U minus L or U plus any other coefficients L, and still I do the observation, I find it in U, I get U after the measurement because the uncertainties are gone. And because of this change, the outcome of my experiment has changed. This is a very important point because what we realize is that this is the key for the security of the QKD protocol that I'm going to explain. So let me go back, remind you what the key distribution protocol problem was. We realized that in order for Alice and Bob to exchange secret messages, they need to randomize their message. For that, they needed a sequence of flip or no flip, so effectively ones and zeros, but they both needed to share this sequence with each other. They share this key together. And we said that the computational approaches to this problem cannot necessarily guarantee long-term security, so instead we want to use quantum mechanics to do that. So let's see if we can, with what we've learned about quantum mechanics in the past few minutes, let's see if we can devise a QKD protocol, which is secure in the sense that if any eavesdropper is attempting to learn about the key, we can detect her, and then we can possibly remove the information that has leaked to that eavesdropper. So the protocol has lots of detail. I might have oversimplified it. I would suggest that if you want to know more details, check out our QKD security room in the breakout rooms after the Q&A session. But the protocol, in short, has two phases. In one set of rounds, Alice has generated a certain key. So she has these bits, and she wants to let Bob know what these bits are. So in certain rounds of the protocol, Alice tries to send these bits to Bob. So for instance, if you want to send bit 1, she sends a single photon through the upper channel. If you want to send bit 0, she sends a photon through the lower channel. And Bob has one of these energy detectors. He can tell where the photon is, and based on that, he can find out what the bit is. randomly interspersed between these transmission rounds, Alice also picked some test rounds. And in this test round, instead of doing this, she does that interferometer experiment 3 that I mentioned. So she sends a photon through a beam splitter, and Bob also uses a similar beam splitter at the end. And here, based on the experiment 3, if there is no eavesdropper trying to eavesdrop on them, they would always expect that only one detector should click, because that's what experiment 3 was about. However, if there is an eavesdropper trying to find out what the message is, because the message, the key bit, is effectively, if you are Eve and you look up where the photon is and you find it on the upper branch, then you realize bit 1 has been sent, and then you can send it again to Bob. But in this test round, if Eve does the same strategy to find out where the bit is, where the photon is, then she messes up, because according to experiment 4, the result of this experiment would change from only this detector clicking to either of them could possibly click. And this can be used by Alice and Bob to basically bound the amount of information that might have leaked to a potential Eve, and then they can use certain classical techniques to remove that information in an effective way. So this is, as I said, is a very brief understanding of how a QKD protocol works. This is similar to the protocol that was first proposed by these two gentlemen, Bennett and Brossard, in 1984, and you might have heard the name BB84. It has a slightly different way of implementation using polarization, which I replaced with up or down, but it's effectively the same idea. And since then, there have been a huge number of variants and other protocols, each of which is trying to make the system more practical, makes it more efficient, make it more implementable with the technologies that we have today. But no matter which technology we use, and no matter which protocol we use, and even if you've forgotten why this whole QKD business is about, or you didn't fully follow my description of quantum mechanics and the QKD protocol that I explained, most of these protocols have to work in a new regime of operation that relies on the generation, transmission, and detection of single photons, or very, very weak signals, if not a single photon, perhaps a few photons. So this is quite a new adventure from a communications point of view, bearing in mind that classically, when you're using optical fibers, for instance, for your communication, you're typically sending billions of photons in any pulse. So single photon communication is quite an extreme regime of operation. And with that comes a lot of challenges and a lot of excitement. So in the third part of my talk, I'm going to explain some of the key achievements that we've had in the past few years, as well as some of the challenges that we face in deploying these systems for public use for all effectively. So let me start with a grand vision that we have for what we call quantum internet. So quantum internet is effectively is a future communication network in which not only it can transfer classical data as we do today, watching movies, etc., but also we can have these additional features of quantum security, for instance, in QKD, as well as many other quantum communication applications that I didn't have time to go through, but if you're interested, my colleagues in the Beyond QKD room would be able to tell you about them. But like the old motto for mobile communication system, we want this quantum internet to be available anytime, anywhere, and then for anyone. So we need to make this system available to multiple users. We need to make it cost efficient, and we need to cover any distances around the globe. So the common perception is that this needs to be done in phases, and we have made some way. So we have accomplished certain developments that we're halfway through some of these phases, but perhaps there are some other phases which would take much longer to achieve. So I'm trying to give some examples, some key concepts, some ideas behind each of these phases, And the term generation is arbitrary here, so it's not something that you may find in literature. And then see what has been accomplished and what needs to be accomplished down the road. So one of the key challenges that single photon communication is the issue of loss and distance. So if you know, if I'm teaching a digital communication module in third year, and when I get to the optical fiber part, I just mentioned what an amazing optical channel it is. It's low loss, low noise, and high bandwidth. Is pretty much everything that you want in a communication channel. However, even with this channel, the loss in an optical fiber, although it's very low, still is detrimental to the transmission of a single photon. So for Alice and Bob to exchange a secret key, what they have to do is, once Alice sends a single photon, that photon must be received by Bob in order to extract data from it. But what if this photon gets lost? And in a fiber of length 100 kilometers, the chance of Bob getting that single photon is 1 over 100. If you go to 200 kilometers, that would become 1 over 10,000. If you go to 300 kilometers, that would become 1 over 1 million. And they just explode in an exponential way. So once we're talking about how many qubits we can exchange between Alice and Bob per unit of time, you usually see an exponential decay with distance. So in addition to that, at some point, so throughout my talk, I assume that those energy detectors, which are effectively single photon detectors, are ideal. But in reality, they are not ideal. They cannot be noise-free. So sometime in your communication system, you get to a point that the chance of your receiver noise generate a fake click is higher than what actually the chance of getting the photon that Alice has sent. And at that point, you can no longer securely exchange any secret keys. So we have the issue of rate versus distance. We have the issue of background noise. Interestingly, despite all this limitation, QKD has already been demonstrated over nearly 600 kilometers, and this has been achieved by one of the partners in QCALL project, Toshiba. But the key that you get is very low. So we can see that once we go to long distances, this is 10 to the minus something bits per second. It's probably not useful for anything. So what's the solution? The immediate solution that quantum community is thinking about is what is called trusted node QKD networks. So effectively, for instance, we have a backbone in the UK. This is an old idea, so back in 2004, 2008. But it's been revived recently across the globe. So for instance, in the UK, we have a UK quantum network in the south that, for instance, if you are in Southampton and you want to exchange a key with BT, you might just exchange a key, a secure key with your neighboring node, that node with its neighboring node, and so on and so forth until you reach to BT. And then you can use all these keys that you have exchanged to relay your message in a secure way to the end party. So this is an interesting solution, first because it's doable and implementable with today's technology, and secondly because you're learning how to implement the systems in our infrastructure. So it has some benefits. It's not necessarily the ultimate solution because for some application, it may not be acceptable that all these middle parties learn about your message. These are effectively your service provider nodes. These can be taught as a backbone network that you're using for exchanging secret keys. The best example of the longest example of such a network is the one in China between Beijing and Shanghai with over 30 nodes and covering around 2,000 kilometers, which is one of, and it's in operation with customers in different cities. Okay, so what I want to do with this backbone network is eventually, if I want to provide a QKD service to home users, I need to also offer a quantum access network to allow home users to connect to those backbone network, and then via that backbone network, they exchange secret keys with whatever party that they want. So the good news is that if you look at the trend in optical fiber networks, is that we are seeing a more and more migration toward what we call fiber to the home. That is, in order for you as a home user to be able to send more data or download more data in a faster and more efficient way, we have moved the optical fiber network closer and closer to your home. And the trend is that at some point in the future, it would be widely available. So you just get, instead of a coax cable to your home, you get a fiber to your home, to your router, and then maybe you're connecting to it via your wireless router. So that means that this millions of kilometers of fiber that have been installed under the ground is a way to do quantum communication as well, which is good, which is because we rely on photons. But what I haven't mentioned so far is that the way I explained QKD in terms of transmitting light through an optical fiber channel, perhaps, requires the same old methodology that in my age, for instance, when the internet was new, we had this modem, you have a cable-based system. You have to connect your modem to the telephone line, your computer to the modem, and everything should have set still so that you can just send a couple of kilobits per second across your telephone line. Things have changed enormously. Every one of us is carrying a mobile computing device in our pocket, which can wirelessly connect to the internet, and we do lots of amazing things. So one question which is always important to answer in order to widely deploy QKD technologies is whether it is possible to use QKD in the wireless mode. And the short answer is yes. Perhaps there are some limitations, like it might be easier to use wireless QKD in the indoors environment. And this is where actually 6G, sixth generation mobile communication, comes in with technologies such as Li-Fi, which is the equivalent of Wi-Fi, but for light, and which allows us that basically communicate in an indoor environment between the server node and your mobile device or your laptop. With Li-Fi, you want to transmit a lot of data, but you can use exactly the same infrastructure to transmit your single photon. And this experiment, these prototypes have been actually built a long time ago, back in 2006 in Bristol. HP Labs and Bristol University came up with a handheld device by which you could exchange secret key with an ATM machine. More recently in Oxford, perhaps we have a more advanced version of this setup. And then with other technologies that we have for chip-based QKD, so you can basically integrate your QKD transmitter or receiver on small pieces, it's very possible to have a mobile device which is capable of doing QKD using light. So if you're interested in this integrated optics side of QKD technologies, we have folks in the industry room which could help you with the details of designs and ideas that are being used there. Okay, so let me go back to that problem of distance and the issue of trust. So if you remember, for instance, in the example of Beijing-Shanghai experiment, if you want to send something from Beijing to Shanghai, you have to trust 32 nodes in the middle or 30 nodes in the middle in order to transmit your message. And you get to thousands of kilometers. An alternative solution to this which is very hot today and very attractive, is the technologies related to satellite QKD. So what's the idea? Suppose you are sitting in two faraway cities, and there is a satellite which is going around the Earth so many times a day. So in principle, what you can do is you can exchange a key with this satellite once it passes your city. And once the satellite passes the other city, they can exchange a key with the other city. And now that you have a key exchange with a common node, you can use this common node to relay your message. So effectively, it's a trusted node solution, but only with one trusted node in the middle. And this trusted node happens to be far in space. So it's not easily accessible to eavesdropping. Interestingly, this experiment has already been done. So what I just said, it wasn't science fiction, it's the reality. Back in 2017, China launched the first QKD satellite into orbit. This is a low Earth orbit, so around 500 kilometers from the Earth, and it goes around the Earth 100 times a day. So wherever you are, you probably see it twice a day, once in the morning and once in the evening. It's very noisy typically in the morning, so you have to communicate with it at night. So you've got a window of 5 minutes per 24 hours every day to to communicate to the satellite and exchange a key. And there are a number of experiments. There are a huge number of new activities on satellite QKD. I would strongly recommend to check out the satellite QKD room if you're interested in this side of the game. This is exciting news. However exciting and interesting, satellite QKD is quite an expensive solution. And there are restrictions that it may not be the most reliable solution. So for instance, it's very weather dependent. If it is cloudy, it's little that you can do, especially in this spring season in the UK, that we've had more rain than ever, I assume. But in addition to that, this it requires large telescope, for instance. It's not something that you can imagine you could put that on the roof of your house. Every house, you have a big optical telescope to talk to satellite. So I believe it will be part of the solution, but it would still be nice to have a solution on the ground as well. And these two can complement each other. So the main solution that we have is a solution based on distributing entanglement. So it would have been a pity to talk about quantum communication without explaining what entanglement is. So I'm trying to explain it a little bit, and then perhaps in the rooms that we have for long distance QKD, you can learn more about it. So this is an alternative protocol to the simple protocol, QKD protocol, that I described earlier. Imagine you have a source which generates what I call entangled photon pairs, in the sense that either it generates two photons, either both photons are on the upper branch or both photons are on the lower branch. And I have that weird superposition that I briefly talked about to describe the state of the system. So there is no classical counterpart. So, but if I want to oversimplify it and give you a classical version of this, which is not exactly this, but it would be like you have two boxes. Each box carries a bit, and this bit could be 1 or 0. But if the bit in this box, left box, is 1, the bit in the right-hand box is also 1. If it is 0, then that would be 0 as well. Then you can imagine if I send the boxes to Alice and Bob, they can measure on which branch they've obtained the photon, and then they can share a key, either 1 or 0. The interesting thing about this entangled photon pair is that there are mechanisms by which you can extend entanglement to longer distances. So suppose now I have Alice and Bob, each of which has one of these entangled photon pair source. So they generate these entangled photons, and they send them to a middle node, at which they do a particular measurement. It's called Bell state measurement, because this particular state is one particular type of Bell state. But again, in my oversimplified classical example, you can think of it. So suppose if I was able to do a XOR operation on the content of these boxes without observing what's inside. So suppose I had 1 here and 1 here. I do the XOR, I get 0. If I had 0 and 0, it was the same. 0 plus 0, I would have got 0. So if the result of this XOR happens to be 0, then I don't know whether I've got 1 or 0, but I can tell that whatever I've got on this end is the same as what I've got on the other end. If the result of this XOR was 1, I simply have a different type of correlation. If I have 1 here, I would have 0 here, and vice versa. But still, they are correlated. So that essence of correlation, that it is in an entangled state, would remain. So in the quantum version of it, you have to do a different measurement, obviously, but this feature would remain. You will basically extend that quantum correlation from a shorter distance to a longer distance. And this is the key idea behind what we call a quantum repeater. So if you have a long distance to cover, what you can do, you can split the distance. For every shorter distance, you distribute some entangled states. You store them in what we call a quantum memory. Then you do a Bell state measurement on the middle memories. And once that's successful, you have effectively extended the entanglement over twice as long of a distance. You repeat this process n times. You go from distance L0 to 4L0 to 8L0, 16L0, so on and so forth. And that way you can cover a long distance. So I'm coming up to the end of my talk. Again, as I said, if you're interested, check out the long distance QKD room with more concrete examples and possibly a lab tour although I'm not sure about that. The lab is available, but check it out. There would be interesting discussions. So a key requirement for deploying QKD at larger scale is to have proper standards and certification procedures. And this is something that has been pursued for a long time in ETSI, is the European Telecommunication Standard Institute. And more recently, in many other standardization bodies, including ITU and IETF, which are responsible for the internet, as well as IEEE and ISO. So this is good news because you have a growing number of commercial companies in our field. And we're perhaps very fortunate in QCALL to have two of the most established companies in the field, ID Quantic and Toshiba. But it's a huge number of companies that are coming up mainly because of the huge investment that the governments and institute like the European Union across the globe have made on these new technologies. There are many exciting endeavors and many startup companies. So what I told you about is not just science fiction. It's something that you can now buy. It's for quite a long time, this is something that you can buy from some of these companies. But this is becoming more and more straightforward to come up with a customized solution for your smaller networks. And in some time in the future, that would be possible to see it implemented in wider scale for all possible users. So let me finish my talk by just summarizing just the vision that I mentioned about this quantum internet. We've got to the stage of development of these new technologies that contribution is needed from almost any disciplines in engineering. And science is no longer just a physics problem. It hasn't been for a while right now. And for the type of problem that we have to overcome, like making our integrated designs better for mass production and for designing new protocols or the electronics that goes with these systems, all these systems require expertise in different disciplines. So I hope that if you find this topic interesting, you can join us for building this future together. So let me thank you for your attention, as well as my group members, as well as the whole team of QCALL, which I had the pleasure of working with them over the past 4 years. I might have missed some, but there were too many. So thank you very much. If you're interested in this topic, we do have some interesting videos and stories on our webpage, as well as the recording of our previous workshops and the schools. So if you can find that on our webpage. So thank you very much. I'd be happy to answer questions if there is any. So back to you, Marcus.
Thank you, Mohsen, for this very nice talk and introduction to the field. Actually, there are a couple of questions. One of them you have already partially replied to it, but let me read them. So the first, and of course, if there is further questions, please take the opportunity now to write them in the chat. So the first question is, in classical physics, once the signal energy is small, we need to worry about noise. What is the implication noise in quantum communications?
Very good question. Well, I will answer to this question from two perspectives, because one aspect of that would be about the experiment that I mentioned. All of these were thought experiments, but because these experiments can be actually implemented in practice. So yes, if you have non-ideal detectors, then you have to worry about whether what you're observing is the real quantum effect or is the noise effect. But with current technology, for instance, with the single photon detectors that we have, we can bring them to a level that the noise is well below the energy of a single photon. So in that sense, we can make sure that the experiment is correct. But the other aspect is perhaps what Marcus mentioned is the fact that what happens to our QKD system, to the exchange of secure keys, if we have a noisy detector. And the key issue that would happen is, okay, sometimes you will get, for instance, in the key transmission rounds, your detector may click because of the noise, whereas this photon have been lost. In which case, you have no guarantee that the click is on the right detector. You might get an error because of that. So as part of this protocol, as part of this post-processing aspect of the protocol, what we have to do first is to reconcile the keys that Alice has sent versus the one that Bob has received. So they will employ some error correction techniques, classical error correction techniques, to make sure the key that they share is identical. And then at some point also they have to estimate how much error they've got in the test rounds. And if you have dark counts or other noise system, that probably just results in overestimating the amount of noise that the amount of interference that Eve might have caused. So you just, because the objective is to bound the amount of information that has leaked to Eve, this is still safe to do. This doesn't cause much problem for you in that sense.
Okay, thank you. I will go to the second question. As I said, this one you already partially addressed it during your talk, but maybe you want to add something further. So the question is, can there be a wireless physical realization of quantum communication, like in classical communications?
I didn't get the first part of the question. It's about wireless.
Yes, can you have a wireless physical realization of quantum communication that you do in classical?
Yeah, so the short answer is yes, it will have some limitations, as I said. So for instance, we do need to control the background noise. So implementing the system in outdoor environment is quite challenging, especially if it's with the sunlight or other sources of background noise in the environment. But there are theoretical work, some of which done by people in my group, that suggest that if we have some control on the type of lighting in an indoor environment, like if you use LED bulbs, for instance, you can manage with the proper choice of wavelengths, you can manage to exchange a key, not only with someone else or somewhere else in the room, but also with the nearest central office in your network. So you can imagine that you're sitting in a building, that building looks like this. You communicate through a collection apparatus that collects light and couples it to fiber, and that goes to the central office for detection. And at that point, you can exchange a secret key with the central office, which is the first node of your backbone network. So yes, it is possible. As I said, it's been demonstrated at short distances, like half a meter or so in the Oxford experiment. But there is no reason that we cannot go to cover a typical room for that matter. The issue of outdoor wireless QKD is a bit more challenging, as I said, unless you are in like free space or between satellites, which allows you to have the proper alignment and collection of light.
Thank you. So we go to the next one. The question is light the only possible medium for wireless physical realization?
Very good question. Well, we have in quantum mechanics a challenge, two competing phenomena. So we have that energy of a single photon versus the energy of thermal light. And so one of them will be given by that constant h times f, which was under the order of 10 to the minus 20 joules or so in the optical regime, versus kBt, which is a Boltzmann constant times the temperature. So whenever kBt is comparable to hf, then you have to worry about the impact of thermal noise on your system. And that means that if f, the frequency of your laser source or whatever source that you're using for QKD, goes down, it would be a regime of operation that kBt could be larger than hf, and at that point we cannot do QKD. So if you just work out the numbers, it turns out that this transition from QKD to no QKD perhaps happens around terahertz regime. But still, you might need to have to work in certain conditions. So for instance, when we were talking about the temperature, we were talking about the temperature across the channel. So if you're thinking of room temperature, then it would be challenging even if you go to terahertz. So that's one way to look at it. So if you want, is it optical the only regime of operation? Not in principle, but it's perhaps the easiest one to use because of that fundamental competition with thermal light.
Okay, thank you. So we go to the next one. In classical cryptography, we claim about the lightweightness or efficiency of the communication, as because of IoT, I guess is Internet of Things, one of the major concern is about performance or efficient resource utilization. How do we observe this lightweightness factor in quantum communication?
That's again an important question. This is something to work on. So this could be one of the future challenges that we have. I agree with you that if you have limitation on your system in terms of energy, in terms of computational power, in terms of size, weight, etc., it would be a challenge. Some of these challenges we can overcome, for instance, by using integrated optics that I have the picture on. So some of it could be managed by proper choice of the protocol. So some of them, it turns out that for QKD, the two sides of the game, the source versus the measurement sites, are not necessarily similar in terms of complexity. You might be able to use certain protocol in which the source side is much easier, and that's what the key idea behind having this handheld devices, for instance, to be used as a source, whereas the receiver side was this bulky ATM machine. So for a situation like IoT or wireless sensor networks, it's well imaginable to think about that you basically use the lighter part of the system at the sensor nodes or that at the device side of the system, and then you will have a heavier load on the service provider node. The other thing that I can say is that we have similar restriction in terms of space, in terms of volume, weight, energy consumption, etc. in satellite QKD. And the trend right now is moving toward using very small satellites. They're called CubeSats, which are, each cube is just 10 centimeter by 10 centimeter by 10 centimeter. And typically with a few of these cubes, you can run a satellite QKD system. It is again, we can at least envisage a future in which we do have enough advanced enough technology to enable the widespread usage of QKD for IoT applications. But this is something to work on. I'm not claiming we are already there.
Okay, thank you. So as I said, we have still a few minutes for more questions. So if anyone has further questions, please write it on the chat. I have one question. It's for you. What would be the most urgent challenges? Because you have been talking about challenges that have to be addressed, but for you, what would be the most important ones to address in the short term?
Well, that's an interesting question. I'm not sure what would be the most urgent one. It depends on what objectives we have, but maybe I can say that there have been some other challenges that I didn't mention at all because of the time restriction. So for instance, one of the key aspects of QKD is the security. And then with the security, is based on certain assumptions that we make. So it is very important that in any implementation of QKD, we make sure we meet those assumptions, or otherwise the security of our protocol might be jeopardized. So there is an important field in QKD security called implementation security, which basically looks at whether the assumptions that we've made is realistic and it can be met in practice, And then depending on what assumptions are made or what in practice we observe, we can specify how many secret key bits we can generate in a QKD system. So there are many hidden challenges, perhaps. But what I want to say is that the challenge is not necessarily all in the implementation aspect of it, although that's a big challenge. Still, we have work to do to make sure our implementations are secure, and this is something that we learned throughout the time. The more systems we implement, we come up with better ideas, and we have witnessed some of those ideas in the past few years. One of which is the one which was behind that 600-kilometer QKD demonstration. So I don't have a specific answer which is the most urgent one, but I can think of many other challenges that we have to address, as well as the ones that I've just explained.
Okay, thank you. So I think if there are further questions, we can maybe stay in this room for a few minutes in case someone has further questions. Again, you can write it in the chat. Otherwise, maybe people could already start moving to the breakout rooms. I remind you that the first one is about QKD security and protocols. The second one about satellite and free space QKD. The third one is about long distance QKD. The fourth one about beyond QKD applications, and the fifth one about QKD industry. And in this regard, there was a question that is, in which breakout rooms do we have virtual tours? I'm not sure if there will be a virtual tour, but if there is experimental part, was it the industry, the breakout room 5, Mohsen? Is this correct?
I think it might be in the QKD security room and possibly in the long distance QKD room.
Okay, so in room 1 and 3.
Yes. That's
okay.
what I remember.
So if everyone is fine with this, again, if we can wait here for a few minutes in case there are further questions, and if not, I hope to see you in the breakout rooms. So maybe it's time that we can activate them, yeah, and people can move. Okay, by the way, it is, yeah, it's written in the chat. Antonio just reminds us that in the long distance room, that is number 3, there will be pictures and videos of quantum repeater lab, for instance. So this is in breakout room 3.
Perfect.
And yeah, and Davide from the NIVA reminds us that in the security of QKD, that is breakout room 1, he will briefly show the Geneva QKD lab. That is certainly interesting. So if there are no further questions, I think, Mohsen, we can stop here. Again, thank you very much for your nice talk.
Well, thank you for sharing it.
And I see you in the breakout rooms.
Sure. I will be staying here for a while. If there is any further question, then I'll join the breakout rooms.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.